Hello, everyone. This is section 1A.1, individuals and variables for CP statistics. And you'll note that our goal for the end of the session is to identify individuals and variables in a data set, and then to be able to classify variables as either categorical or quantitative. So let's talk a little bit about what that means. First, let's start by defining an individual. An individual is an object that is described by a set of data. That can be anything: people, animals, things. So oftentimes in this class, when we talk about individuals, we'll be talking about people that we gather data from. But we could be talking about trees. We can gather different pieces of data from trees, or sometimes of animals like your pets. So for every individual, we have these things called variables. We're already familiar with the concept of variables from other mathematics classes, but these are a different type of variables. We're never going to be solving for X here, but each individual, let's just say every person, has a bunch of different variables that make them up: their height, their weight, their eye color, etc. A variable is simply a characteristic that can take on different values for different individuals. So those of us in this class, we have different heights. Some of us. Some of us have very similar heights. We have different eye colors. And when we talk about height versus eye color, that gets to a very important point because height and eye color are different sorts of variables. Eye color is a categorical variable. A categorical variable places someone into a group or a category, right? Category being the root word there. So eye color is a category. It's not a number. A quantitative variable uses numbers. These are usually counts of things or measurements. So a count being something like, how many pets do you have? A category could be something like, do you have a cat? And those answers would be yes or no. So there's a couple things in this section that we need to be able to do that we talked about on the last slide. Figure out who the individuals are, who is being described in a data set. Then we need to figure out what are the different variables that are being presented about those individuals: height, weight, etc. From there, we're going to take it a step further and figure out which of those variables are quantitative and which of those variables are categorical. Because in statistics, we'll find that we treat those variables differently. Think about the graphs that you already know how to make. If we've got numbers, we wouldn't necessarily want to make a pie graph. But when you're dealing with categories, that's when pie charts and bar graphs and those sorts of things become really important. Most of the work that we do in this course deals with quantitative variables, numbers. I do want to also very quickly point out that not every number is quantitative. So there are some numbers, for instance, your zip code, that categorizes you. It's not really a quantity. So my zip code is 06260 because I live in Putnam. That is a category for me. It tells me which category, which city I fall into. It doesn't really um, quantify where I live. So think about it that way. Is it a quantity? Is it quantifying something, or is it categorizing something? So let's work through one quick example. This example is an alternate example from our textbook, so it doesn't appear in your textbook, only mine. And it's called Gotta Fly. The problem statement over here says the table displays information from a sample of 10 randomly selected large airports from around the world. First, we want to identify the individuals and variables in the data set. Individuals are usually pretty easy. It's going to tell us where these individuals come from. So here it says, from a sample of 10 randomly selected large airports from around the world. So our individuals are 10 airports. You could be a little more specific. You could write what I underlined there: 10 randomly selected large airports from around the world. Then we're asked, what are our variables? It's kind of important to note here that airport name is not a variable. That's simply the name of the airport. It's more of an identifier. It doesn't really describe something about the airport, but elevation, that one does. Municipality, where the airport is, for sure. Country, radio frequency, runway length, and runway surface. And I'm going to stop writing surface there because my little writing tool doesn't let me write into the very corner of the page. So now we've identified the individuals, we've identified the variables. Now we need to classify as categorical or quantitative. I like to deal with categorical first because if they're not numbers, they're categories for sure. So runway surface, categorical. Runway length, well, that's a number. It's in feet. Typically, if we've got a unit, it's a quantity. So I'm going to label that as quantitative. While I'm at it, why don't we deal with the other words? Oops, didn't mean to move it there. Our other words being municipality and country. Those are both categories, right? If they're in words, there's no way they're quantitative. So let's look at our other numbers and just make sure they make sense as quantities. Radio frequency, yeah, I could see you arguing that one either way, but I'm going to call it quantitative. It has a unit, and that's usually our giveaway. Same thing for elevation. That looks like a quantity. If you can handle a problem like this, you should be all set for this section, but let's go on to the last example, and we'll see what you could do on your own. Since this is our first lesson, this is the first time you're seeing this, but get used to seeing this guy down here, this pause, practice, and play. I'm going to do this in our videos for an example where I want you to pause the video, take your time and try the problem, and then play, and you can see my solution. So I fully expect that when you see a problem like this, you will be pausing, you'll be practicing, and then you'll play the video to check your work and see how you did before moving on. So here's your opportunity. Go ahead and pause. And when you're ready, unpause, and we can see how your practice went. All right, it's time to check our work. Let's first identify our individuals. We can see here that Melina recorded some data and she got it from the parking lot. So really, she was looking at cars that students drive in the parking lot. So I'm going to say cars in the parking lot. And because it takes a while to write out, I've already made my little list of variables here. Except for one, if you were paying close attention, you'll notice the license plate could make a really good argument for that not really being a variable, right? That's sort of an identifier. That's the thing that's unique to that car. So it's not really a variable. We tend to think with variables, sometimes um, you can have the same thing for different cars. These other 7 things, though, these are our different variables. So we've got model, year, number of stickers, color, weight in kilograms, navigation system, and highway gas mileage. So last time I started with some categories. This time I'm going to start with the quantities. This little number here pretty much indicates that this should be a quantitative variable. It's talking about a number of stickers that are on there. We're also given one other one that gives us units. We know that's got to be quantitative as well. And if you don't drive yet or you don't really know about cars, this one might not be in your wheelhouse, but gas mileage will also be quantitative. That is a number. The other things that we can be sure of, model is a category. Color is categorical, just like eye color. And says whether it has a nav system. So whether or not means it's pretty much a yes, no. That's a category. Besides license plate, the other one that I expect us to have maybe a little bit of difficulty with is year. Year is a number, but just like zip code, I would argue that year is a category when you're talking about cars. You're telling us sort of how old the car is. You're sorting it into a category based on its age when you give a year. Same thing with your birth year, right? Your birth year is kind of a category in a way. It's also a quantity. Sometimes I'll accept arguments in both directions on that, but I would like you to see, or I would like to see you categorizing year as a categorical variable. All right, that's all for this section, section 1A.1.